When my son, the boy I had poured my entire life into raising, brought her home to meet me and announced he wanted to get married, my heart filled with an emotion I couldn't quite name. She was a youthful woman with dark hair that fell to her shoulders, large, round eyes, and a smile that seemed permanently fixed on her lips. While she wasn't what you call a breathtaking beauty, she had a gentle and virtuous air about her, exactly the kind of presence I had always hoped for in a wife for my Michael. From that very first day we met, her behavior was everything I could have asked for, designed to please me. Every small gesture, every single word she spoke, was a perfect picture of respect and propriety. She would offer a slight, warm nod of her head, and her voice, clear as a running brook, would say, "Hello, Mom. It's so wonderful to finally meet you." During those first few days after she moved in, our small house suddenly felt cozier, filled with a new kind of laughter and a warmth that hadn't been there before. Her name was Sarah, and she was an early riser, always up before the sun to prepare a proper breakfast for the whole family. The dining table was always graced with my favorite dishes, thoughtfully prepared just for me. "Here you go, Mom. Have some of this tomato soup. Michael told me it was your favorite," she would say so sweetly, gently topping off my cup of tea. Watching her move through the house, so skillfully managing all the chores, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. She was, in every way, the kind of devoted daughter-in-law I had spent years dreaming about. I remember telling my closest friends, "Having a daughter-in-law who feels like your own flesh and blood is the greatest treasure in life. I am just so incredibly lucky to have found one in Sarah." Those words were more than just a boast to my friends. They were a powerful conviction that had taken root deep in my heart. I truly believed she was a wonderful new addition to our family, someone who would bring nothing but happiness and peace to our little home. But it seems that happiness was just a short-lived dream, a sweet fantasy that existed for only those first 3 months. Gradually, small changes started to happen. At first, I simply brushed them aside, thinking she was just going through an adjustment period, still finding her footing in a new home. But those little things started to grow bigger, and soon they began to trouble me in a way I couldn't ignore. I started to notice it with the refrigerator. My fridge, which had once been a reliable source of comfort, always stocked with my favorite foods and the seasonal fruits I loved to use for my desserts, was somehow becoming bare. In place of the things I knew, I found strange new dishes and ingredients I had never seen before. Some of them I couldn't even identify. One afternoon, I opened the door, looking for the fresh celery and carrots I always used to make my classic chicken pot pie, but they were simply gone. Sarah must have used them for something, I told myself, trying my best to calm the uneasy feeling in my stomach. But then it happened again, and again. Items I had bought myself, things I had carefully placed on my designated shelf, would suddenly vanish without a trace. I never found the courage to ask her about it. I was afraid she would think I was a difficult old woman, prying into every little detail of her kitchen. It wasn't just the food. My phone bill began to climb to an alarming degree. For years, I had only ever spent a fixed amount each month, mostly on calls to my friends and a few relatives who lived out of state. My bill was always predictable, a small, manageable expense. But recently, the charges had started climbing at a frightening pace, far exceeding what I normally spent. I felt a knot of worry tighten in my chest, but I didn't want to make a fuss. I tried to find other explanations. Perhaps I had just been using the phone more than I realized, I thought. Or maybe the phone company had changed its rates. I searched for any possible reason to explain away the strange things happening around me, because I desperately did not want to believe that something was truly wrong. But the thing that hurt me the most, the thing that caused me the deepest pain, wasn't the disappearing food or the soaring phone bills. It was the look in her eyes. That gaze, which had once been so full of respect and genuine affection, had now turned cold and distant. It was no longer the look of a devoted daughter-in-law looking at her husband's mother with gratitude and love. Instead, deep within those dark, round eyes, I started to see something else entirely. indifference, and even a faint, chilling hint of resentment. Every time I looked at her, Sarah would turn her eyes away. The smile that used to reach them, that used to feel so genuine, was gone. In its place was something stiff and awkward, a strained pulling of her lips that felt completely false. Even her simple greetings, the little, "Good morning," or "How are you?" had lost their warmth. They became flat, mechanical things, words spoken out of duty and nothing more. I could feel it, you see, a wall being built between us, brick by invisible brick. It was a silent construction, but it was growing taller and thicker every single day. All the closeness and warmth I had once felt from her, that easy comfort that had made our house a home, had simply vanished, dissolving into thin air like smoke from a dying fire. I just couldn't understand it. I truly couldn't. My mind went around and around in circles, searching for a reason. Had I done something wrong? Had I treated her poorly in some way I hadn't noticed? I had always tried so hard, from the very beginning, to love her and care for her as if she were my own daughter, the daughter I never had. I always tried to be patient. I always tried to be forgiving. And most of all, I always trusted her. So why? Why had she changed so drastically? I remembered the woman my Michael had brought home. She was so polite, so gentle, always expressing her gratitude for the smallest bit of help I offered. But now, it was as if that person had never existed. The Sarah who lived in my house now was a complete stranger. A cold and distant figure I didn't recognize at all. I spent my days trying to find an answer. I would sit for hours replaying the last 3 months in my head, sifting through every conversation, every interaction, every shared moment. Did I say something that hurt her feelings? Did I do something that bothered her? Something that made her feel unwelcome? I searched my memory until my head ached, but I came up with nothing. I had always just been myself, a mother-in-law who wanted nothing more than a peaceful, happy home for her son and his new wife. This feeling of confusion, this heavy knot of anxiety, just grew bigger and bigger inside my heart with each passing day. I didn't have the courage to speak to my son, Michael, about it. I was so afraid of troubling him, of putting him in a terrible position between his mother and his wife. And I couldn't bring myself to confide in my friends either. I was terrified they would judge me, that they would see me as one of those mothers-in-law, the difficult, nagging kind you hear stories about. So, I kept all of it locked away inside myself, silently swallowing the sadness and the bitter disappointment that had become my constant companions. Then one day, it happened. It was as if fate itself decided it was time for the truth to come out. It was late in the evening, and I was sitting quietly in the living room, reading a book under the soft glow of a lamp. Sarah's bedroom door was ajar, just a crack, but enough for sound to travel. I could hear the low murmur of her voice as she talked on the phone. At first, I paid it no mind. It was her private conversation, and I had no interest in eavesdropping. But then, a sudden, loud burst of laughter cut through the quiet of the house, and it made me jump. This wasn't the clear, sweet laugh I was used to hearing from her. No, this was something else entirely. It was a sound full of scorn, dripping with a contempt so sharp it felt like a physical blow. And then I heard her words, and every single one of them was a sharp blade, carving its way directly into my heart. That old hag is so damn stubborn. I wish she'd just hurry up and drop dead. It felt like my heart stopped beating. The book slipped from my hands and landed on the floor with a dry, hollow thud that echoed in the silent room. A violent tremor ran through my entire body. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. Surely I must have misheard. My mind raced, trying to find another explanation. But there was no mistake. I knew that voice. I knew that laugh. And those words, those terrible, hateful words, they could belong to no one else. It was her. It was Sarah, the daughter-in-law I had loved as if she were my own blood. In that single, horrifying moment, it felt as though my whole world was crumbling down around me. Those words were a slap in the face from a cruel heaven, a brutal answer to all the trust and love I had so freely given her. Everything I had tried to build, all the hopes I had pinned on her, had been shattered into a million tiny pieces. A deep, icy chill started in my spine and spread through my limbs until I was cold all over. My head was spinning, a chaotic mess of disbelief and pain, and my chest felt so tight I could barely breathe. The polite, gentle daughter-in-law I had been so proud of was a fraud. That sweet smile, those respectful words, it had all been an act. It was a perfect mask, a carefully crafted performance designed to fool me, to make me believe in a beautiful illusion. And now, finally, that mask had fallen away, revealing the true face underneath. A face twisted with scorn and filled with a malice I never could have imagined. I just stood there, frozen in the middle of the room, as the tears began to stream down my face. They weren't tears of anger. They were tears of absolute agony and devastating disappointment. I had given her all of my affection, all of my trust without reservation. And what had I received in return? Deceit, contempt, and a venomous curse wishing for my death. In that moment, everything clicked into place. The reason my favorite foods kept disappearing from the refrigerator, the reason the phone bill had suddenly shot through the roof, and the reason for the cold, hateful look in her eyes. It all had a cause. She had never cared for me at all. Not one bit. She had simply been putting on a show, a flawless performance designed to win my trust. Once she had that, she knew she could do whatever she pleased, without ever having to fear my disapproval. My trust was utterly shattered. I had no idea how to face her, no idea what I was supposed to do next. The house, which had once felt so warm and peaceful, suddenly felt cold and unfamiliar, like a stranger's home. The image I had so carefully built in my mind of the perfect, caring daughter-in-law had been completely demolished. In its place was the shadow of a stranger, a woman with malice in her eyes and venom in her words. I knew, even then, that this was only the beginning of a much longer story. And I was certain it was a story that would bring even more pain and more harsh truths. I didn't know how I was going to deal with it, but I understood with a terrible clarity that my life, and likely my son Michael's life as well, would never be the same again. That fateful night, I barely slept. Sarah's cruel words echoed in my mind, over and over again, each repetition a fresh stab of pain in my heart. I was heartsick, not just from the betrayal, but from the overwhelming sense of helplessness and the bitter resentment that was beginning to fester inside me. The next morning, I looked at her through new eyes, eyes filled with suspicion and hurt. But she was the picture of calm, as if nothing had happened at all. She even managed a polite, social smile in my direction. I decided I had to talk to Michael. I was afraid he wouldn't believe me, but I held on to a desperate hope that he would understand what I was going through. That evening, when he got home from work, I asked him to sit with me in the living room. I did my best to keep my voice steady and calm. "Michael," I began, "there's something important I need to talk to you about." He sat down across from me, his expression curious. "What is it, Mom? Is something wrong?" I took a deep breath. I started from the beginning, telling him everything, from the small, strange changes around the house, to her cold, distant stares, and finally, to the horrifying words I had overheard her say the night before. I spoke from the heart, my voice filled with all the pain I had been holding inside, praying that he would feel the truth in my words. But to my utter dismay, Michael just listened quietly, and when I was finished, he gave a small, dismissive shake of his head. "Mom, I think you must have misheard her," he said gently. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." I was stunned. "There's no mistake," I insisted. "I heard it with my own ears. What your wife said was—" He cut me off, his tone firm, though his eyes showed a hint of unease. "Mom, Sarah is such a good person. She's done nothing but respect you and take care of this family since the day she arrived. It has to be a misunderstanding. Maybe you overheard part of a conversation she was having with a friend, and it just sounded bad out of context." Hearing those words from my own son felt like a knife twisting in my heart. He trusted his wife so completely, without a single shred of doubt. His faith in her was so absolute, it blinded him to any other possibility. I felt completely helpless. How could I ever prove what was happening when Sarah was so clever at hiding her true colors? But Michael, all the little things, I pleaded, my voice starting to shake. The changes around the house? The way she looks at me? Surely you've noticed something? Michael just sighed and got to his feet. Mom, I think you're just overthinking things. Sarah is just being Sarah. Please, don't worry yourself like this. And with that, he walked out of the room, leaving me all alone in the quiet living room. A heavy weight settled in my chest. I had counted on him, my own son, to be my support, to stand by my side. Instead, he had dismissed my pain and denied my reality. A wave of loneliness and humiliation washed over me. I understood then that in this fight, I was completely on my own. The days crept by, each one heavier than the last. The air in our home grew thick with a tension I could feel in my bones, a silent, suffocating strain that settled between me and Sarah. In front of my son, Michael, she was the very picture of a dutiful, respectful wife. Her words were honey-sweet, her actions thoughtful and kind. But the moment Michael walked out the door, the mask would fall away, and the woman who remained was a complete stranger. Her face would become a blank slate, her eyes cold and indifferent. If I asked for the smallest favor, a flicker of annoyance, sharp and undisguised, would cross her features. I tried my best to endure it, to swallow the hurt and pretend that I didn't notice. I told myself to be patient, to be strong. But a constant, heavy sorrow had taken up residence in my heart, a weight that never seemed to lift. One week, Michael had to go away on a business trip. He was going to be gone for several days, leaving me alone in the house with her. A cold sense of dread washed over me as he packed his suitcase. I had a terrible feeling that this time alone together would be a trial, a test of my endurance that I wasn't sure I could pass. And as it turned out, my intuition was right. The storm I had sensed brewing on the horizon was about to break. It was around noon on the second day he was gone. I was sitting in the living room, trying to lose myself in a book, when Sarah strode into the room. She didn't make a sound, but I felt her presence like a sudden drop in temperature. Her face was set like stone, and her eyes, when they landed on me, were as sharp and cold as shards of glass. She just stood there for a long moment, staring at me. And then she spoke the words that I will carry with me to my grave. "Get out of my house," she said, her voice low and venomous. "I can't stand looking at you for one more second. This isn't a retirement home." Her words slammed into me, echoing in my ears like a crack of thunder. I froze, the book falling from my lap onto the floor. My entire body went rigid, as if I had turned to stone. This house. This was the house I had spent a lifetime in, the place where I had raised my son, the walls that held every precious memory I owned. And now, in the blink of an eye, she was throwing me out of it. It was my home, my sanctuary, and she was casting me out like a piece of trash. I had dedicated my entire existence to this family. I had worked my fingers to the bone, saved every single penny I could, just so we could afford this house, so I could give my son a stable place to call home. The deed was still in my name. Never in my wildest, most terrifying nightmares did I imagine that I would grow old only to be kicked out of my own home by my daughter-in-law. An unbearable wave of pain, humiliation, and pure, helpless rage crashed over me, stealing the air from my lungs and leaving me completely speechless. What did you say?" I finally managed to stammer out, my voice trembling so badly I could barely form the words. She looked down at me with an expression of pure contempt, as if I were a piece of furniture she was tired of, a burden she couldn't wait to be rid of. "Are you deaf now, too?" she sneered. I said, "Get out. I don't want to see your face in this house ever again." Each word was a dagger that plunged straight into my heart, a pain more profound than 1,000 physical wounds. I felt myself falling, tumbling into a bottomless abyss of despair. Every ounce of strength I had, every bit of fight left in me, just evaporated into nothing. I was utterly and completely defeated. My body began to shake uncontrollably. I simply could not believe that the woman standing before me, the woman I had once loved and trusted, could be capable of such staggering cruelty. And then, in that moment of utter devastation, a thought flickered in the darkness of my mind. It was a crazy thought, a desperate, insane idea, but it felt like the only lifeline I had left. It was perhaps the only way I could survive, the only way I could hold on to my home. I would pretend. I would pretend I had lost my memory. I would act confused, childlike, as if my mind had begun to slip away. If I did that, I reasoned, she might see me as harmless. She would think I had lost my wits and would no longer feel threatened by my presence. I put my plan into action immediately. I began to wander aimlessly down the street, muttering nonsense to myself. I would intentionally forget the date, the time, even people's names. One afternoon, I did something I never thought I would do. I took a marker and, like a small, defiant child, I scribbled all over a clean, white wall in the hallway. When Sarah saw what I had done, her eyes widened first in utter disbelief, and then, that disbelief morphed into a look of sheer horror. She looked at me, a panicked expression on her face, but I knew what she was really afraid of. It wasn't for my health or my sanity. It was fear for her own reputation. She was terrified of what the neighbors would say, what gossip would spread among her friends. She was afraid they would whisper about her mother-in-law losing her mind. She was terrified that my condition would somehow tarnish her perfect image. "Mother, what are you doing?" she cried, rushing over with a cloth to frantically scrub at the marker on the wall. For the first time, her voice held a slight tremor, a crack in the icy, resolute tone she always used with me. I just stared back at her with vacant eyes and a simple, guileless expression. "Oh, I was just drawing a picture," I said, my voice airy and distant. "Isn't it pretty?" I kept my words nonsensical, my gaze unfocused, pushing the act as far as I could to make her believe that I had truly lost my grip on reality. From that day forward, her attitude toward me changed completely. She never yelled at me again. She never threatened to throw me out. Instead, she simply began to ignore me, leaving me to my own devices, sometimes offering a false, pitying look of concern. She believed I was no longer of sound mind, that I was completely unaware of the world around me. In her eyes, I had become harmless. I had become someone who no longer mattered at all. But what she didn't know was this: behind my vacant eyes and that innocent, guileless smile, I was remembering every single thing. I remembered every word she had ever said to me, the cruel words, the mocking words, the words she used when she tried to drive me out of my own home. Each one of them was a deep scar carved into my heart, a constant and painful reminder of the cold, hard truth of this woman. I remembered the very specific way her tone of voice would shift when she spoke to me, compared to when she spoke to my son, and then again when she spoke to her friends. I saw right through the clear distinctions, the calculated falsehood hidden in every subtle change of her voice. I remembered every single time she locked her bedroom door when Michael wasn't home. Was she afraid that I would come into her room and uncover some of her secrets? Or was it simply that she couldn't bear the thought of me even being in her line of sight? Every time I heard the soft, metallic click of the lock sliding into place, my heart would tighten in my chest. This house was mine, the home I had built, and yet I was being made to feel like a complete stranger, an unwelcome guest under my own roof. And I remembered every single tear I secretly swallowed in the dead of night. During those long, sleepless nights, I would curl myself into a ball on my bed, unable to stop the silent tears from streaming down my cheeks and soaking into my pillow. I couldn't even allow myself the relief of crying out loud, absolutely terrified that my daughter-in-law would hear me. The pain, the humiliation, and the crushing loneliness. It was all eating away at my soul. Why did my life have to come to this? Why did I have to pretend to be losing my mind just to find a little bit of peace in my own home? But every one of those tears was more than just sadness. It was also my resolve. I made a solemn promise to myself. I would not give in. would not let her win. I swore that I would find a way to expose her true face, to make my son see the truth of the woman he married, and to get back my own sense of justice. So, I continued to play the part of a confused, senile old woman. I would walk slowly, my steps shuffling and uncertain. Sometimes I would accidentally drop a dish and shatter it on the floor. I would forget where I put things, then put on a great show of surprise when I found them in some unexpected place. She would look at me with a carefully crafted expression of pity and an undercurrent of genuine relief. She believed her plan had worked perfectly. She believed I was completely and utterly defeated. But what she didn't know was that behind that carefully constructed performance of senility, my mind was as sharp and clear as it had ever been. I was watching her every move, listening to her every word, and committing every single trivial detail to memory. I was gathering evidence, piece by painful piece, for the day when I would finally be able to tear away her sweet, false mask for good. The feeling of living like a boarder in my own home, of having to pretend that I knew nothing at all just to be granted a shred of peace, it was pure agony. But I knew I couldn't stop. I couldn't, because I am a mother, and whether my son chose to believe me or not, I had a duty to protect my family. With each day that passed, my hatred for my daughter-in-law grew deeper. She had systematically turned my life into a tragedy. But it was from the depths of that very hatred that I found the strength to go on. It gave me the strength to fight, the strength to shatter her web of lies, and the strength to take back the peace that was stolen from my own life. I know that this story is still a very long way from being over. And I am going to tell you, step by step, about the quiet, desperate battle of a mother-in-law who was pushed into a corner. Ever since I witnessed that heartbreaking scene through the lens of a hidden camera, the sight of the wooden keepsake box that held everything from my life, being stolen away through the quiet collusion of my daughter-in-law and my own son, I found that I could no longer cry. My tears had all dried up, my heart felt as if it had turned to stone. The most extreme pain had transformed into a terrible, profound silence. I didn't scream. I didn't confront them. I didn't say a single word. I just quietly continued to play my part, the role of the confused, foolish mother-in-law, a silent shadow in my own home. The days passed, and I continued to wear a vacant look on my face. Sometimes I would mumble words that made no sense, or I would accidentally drop something, letting it shatter on the floor. My daughter-in-law, Sarah, watched me do these things and became more and more convinced that her plan had succeeded perfectly. She let her guard down completely, no longer bothering to hide the contempt that had been lurking in her eyes. She believed I had been utterly defeated, that I was now nothing more than a helpless old woman who couldn't recognize anything or anyone around her. Like she had no idea. She couldn't see that behind my facade of weakness and confusion, a storm was quietly gathering. My silence was not a sign of acceptance. It was the preparation for a battle without mercy. I had lost every last shred of trust in my son and my daughter-in-law. Now, all I had was myself, and I had to protect what little I had left. And more importantly, I had to reclaim my own justice. During those days, I kept up the daily habits of any ordinary elderly person, but my mind was constantly working, running at full capacity. I laid out my plans step by step, carefully and meticulously. I knew this would be the final battle of my life, and I could not afford to fail. One morning, I told Sarah that I wanted to go out for a walk to get some fresh air. She didn't suspect a thing. She just offered a few perfunctory words and sent me on my way. I stepped out of the house and took a deep breath of the crisp morning air. My heart felt heavy, but at the same time, it was filled with a steely resolve. I wasn't just going for a walk. I was on my way to see an attorney. The law office was tucked away on a quiet, narrow side street. I walked in, my heart pounding in my chest. A middle-aged attorney with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes greeted me politely. I sat down across from him, trying my best to keep my voice from trembling. "Sir," I began, There are a few things I need your help with. I started to tell him my story. I told him everything, from the very first days after Sarah married my son, to the gradual change in her attitude, and finally, to the ultimate betrayal, how she and my son had stolen my life savings. I explained every single detail clearly, leaving nothing out. But with every word I spoke, my heart felt as if it were being gouged out with a knife. I showed him the video I had recorded with the hidden camera, handing him the irrefutable proof of their actions. The attorney listened intently, nodding from time to time to show he understood. When I finished, he looked at me with an expression of deep sympathy. "I understand how you must feel," he said gently. "This is a very unfortunate situation." After listening to my story and reviewing the evidence, he gave me specific legal advice. I decided to follow his counsel step by step to ensure that everything would proceed exactly as planned. The very first thing I did was withdraw all the savings from my checking account. This money was part of my and my son's joint assets, the fruit of 35 years of my own hard work. It took a great deal of internal struggle for me to make this decision. Withdrawing the money from our joint account meant partially severing the financial ties between me and my son, but I could not allow that money to fall into the hands of people who didn't deserve it. I had to ask the bank for their cooperation, citing health reasons, and, thankfully, they helped me complete the transaction quickly. As I held the passbook, which now showed the account had been completely cleared out, I felt a wave of relief wash over me, followed immediately by a profound sadness. I was relieved to have protected my property, but I was heartbroken that I had been forced to do something like this to my own son. Next, with my attorney's assistance, I rewrote my will. This was one of the most difficult decisions I have ever had to make in my entire life. In my previous will, I had planned to leave all of my property to my only son, Michael. But now, I had to remove his name from the document. With every stroke of the pen as I signed my name, my heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. I had once dreamed that my son would inherit my assets and live a comfortable, happy life. But now, with his own hands, he had thrown it all away. I could not, and would not, allow my property to end up in the hands of a son who had betrayed his own mother, or his cruel, heartless wife. Instead, I decided to draw up the papers to donate my entire estate to a scholarship fund, one that would be set up in my name. You see, I spent my entire life working as a nurse, dedicating myself to helping people stay healthy. I wanted the money I worked so hard for to go to a good cause. I wanted it to help students who were poor but eager to learn, to give them a chance to go to college and make their dreams come true. This would be my way of leaving behind a meaningful legacy, a legacy that wouldn't be spoiled by greed or betrayal. I have faith that this money will be put to its proper use and will bring some good back into the world. After I took care of all the legal paperwork, I started gathering up all my evidence and putting it in order. The deed to the house, sales agreements, and most importantly, the footage from that hidden camera. I carefully saved every single file onto a USB drive. Every video clip, every single photograph was a powerful accusation, an undeniable piece of the hard, cold truth. I made 2 copies of that USB drive. One of them was for my son, Michael. I wanted him to finally face the truth. I wanted him to see what his wife had done, and to see his own part in it, too. I couldn't stand the thought of him living in the dark, surrounded by lies, for the rest of his life. It was my hope that when he saw the proof for himself, he would finally wake up and realize the terrible mistake he had made.